I extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Ajay Kumar, who has just come in. And we're just waiting for the clock to read 11 a.m. It has. Happy to tell you that all of them have elicited great response and have been very exciting. Today, the webinar promises to be no less. We have with us Dr. Ajay Kumar, who is in fact going to give us a lecture today on COVID-19, the resource crunch, and defense modernization. And this he is doing under our Eminent Persons lecture series. Now, as you all know, India, like many other countries, is presently grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a difficult time for everyone around the world. The lockdown has caused offices, businesses, industry, and other activities to kind of grind to a halt. It's impacted on the social and economic life of the country. Anticipating the negative fallout of the pandemic, the government of India has taken certain pragmatic measures. On the 8th of April, the Ministry of Finance issued an office memorandum putting a cap of 15 to 20% on the first quarter spending of various ministries and departments, including the Ministry of Defense. And it appears that we'd be lucky if the spending cut is not extended beyond the first quarter of the present fiscal year. So there is a great chance that we may have to grapple with budgetary issues through the financial year. The Ministry of Defense accounts for nearly 1/7 of the total budget of the central government, and its budget deals with, as you all know, defense and national security. So that's a hard call to make. It's vitally important, therefore, that the spending cut does not affect our defense preparedness or derail the key modernization plan. Now, we have seen that the Prime Minister has announced a massive stimulus package worth 20 lakh crores, nearly US dollars 266 billion. That represents 10% of the budget. And there is also a clarion call by the Prime Minister for vocal for local, that is the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan movement, which is self-reliant India movement. There's a focused sort of move towards making India and self-reliance in these times. Now, we are very grateful today to Dr. Ajay Kumar, Defense Secretary, Ministry of Defense, who, as I said, will speak to us on all these issues. As you all know, Dr. Ajay Kumar, as Defense Secretary, has the responsibility of managing the MoD's budget and the all-important capital acquisition through the Office of DG Acquisition. As the Defense Secretary, he is also a key member of the Defense Minister chaired Defense Acquisition Council, the DAC. He also heads the Defense Procurement Board. If I may add, though he needs no introduction, but before his current assignment, he was Secretary, Department of Defense Production. So he brings to his current office a wealth of experience that is virtually unparalleled. And he's in direct charge of issues that are before us today. Dr. Kumar, and I've known him personally over the past 2 decades. I can vouch for the fact that he's a strong believer in reforms, and we have seen many of his reforms and decisions unfolding before our eyes. The lecture today, I'm happy to note, is attended by the wider strategic community, members of the media, industry, both Indian and some foreign friends as well. And they're all looking forward to what promises to be a very, very informative talk by Dr. Ajay Kumar. Dr. Ajay Kumar is from the Indian Administrative Service, and he has also many laurels to his credit when working in the state government of Kerala. His achievements are again too numerous for me to list out in the limited time that we have. I will now request Dr. Ajay Kumar, the Defense Secretary of India, to take the floor and to speak to us, to deliver this lecture under the Eminent Persons lecture series for the next 25 to 30 minutes. He may take a few minutes more if he pleases to do so, and thereafter we will open up the session to the Q&A part. I look forward to Dr. Ajay Kumar addressing us. The floor is yours. Dr. Ajay Kumar, the Defense Secretary of India.
Good morning, and first of all, my sincere thanks to Shri Sujan Chinoy, who is a good friend, and we go together for over 2 decades now. It's always been, a pleasure to associate with him and to work with him, to learn a lot of things from him, but that's for another time, I guess. I think this is possibly as good a time as ever to discuss the issue that is before us is today possibly the biggest issue that we are facing in defense, and that is with respect to how do we meet the requirement of our resources vis-a-vis our budgetary allocations, and of course the added flavor of the day, the COVID, is also there. But I think the problem is actually far more, it's far longer and has been there building for some years now, and is going to continue with us for some time. So COVID is only a passing phase in this problem. Even if COVID was, am I there? Can someone confirm if I am there?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you, and I'd like to request all others to mute their mics, please. Please do take a look at your box there and mute your mics. Dr. Ajay Kumar, yes, we can hear you. Please continue. Thank you.
Okay. So, if we look at how the problem has been unfolding, one way of looking at what the modernization, which is today the thrust of our defense preparedness, is the capital acquisition is one parameter on which we can assess our modernization, not the whole of it for sure. But the capital procurement budget has progressively decreased over the last 10 years. And from being about 40% of our budget in 2010-11, it has come down to 33%. At the same time, the pension budget has increased from roughly about 32,000 crores at that time to over 1,12,000 crores. Now, these figures are fairly well known. Now, what it means is that we have a systemic problem which is leading to us more and more expenditure which is going for committed, more and more budgetary allocation going for committed expenditure, and as a result, we do not have adequate resources available for the purposes of modernization of the forces. Now, if I were to look at 3 main causes which have resulted in these budgetary constraints that we have, I would like to break them into 3 buckets. One is with respect to the ballooning or the growing pension and wage bill, which has been growing over the years. The second is with respect to non-revenue expenditure, which has kind of grown incrementally, but at the same time has been growing. And the third is also our dependence on import and the model of TOT-based manufacturing in India, which has resulted in higher costs of procurement of capital goods that we use in our defense forces. Now, all these things at some level require reforms which need to be taken up. Now, let me start with some of the revenue expenditure which is non-salary nature, which needs to be addressed. In this regard, the Shikatkar committee, which was set up in 2015 or so, had come out with a series of reforms. And in these reforms, several areas have been identified which could help reducing our non-salary revenue expenditure, both at the service levels, at organizations like NCC, the medical, Armed Forces Medical Services, the MES, and BRO, etc. Now, several of these reforms are now in different stages of implementation. One of the important reform which they mentioned there is outsourcing. Now, several countries world over have adopted outsourcing as an effective way of reducing costs of their operations, but at the same time ensuring that the strategic control remains with the armed forces. Now, as part of this outsourcing, for example, in BRO, we have taken a decision that works about 300 crores or so will be done through outsourced contractors, where there will be interest in outsourced contractors to come and do the work. Similarly, it has been decided that military farms, which were used to provide dairy products and produce fodder for the cattle, need not be there. These could be closed, and we are in process of closing down the military farms across the country. Similarly, now that we have good quality poultry and meat available, packaged meat available, the butcheries that used to be managed and run in the armed forces are being closed down. We have now also looked at closing down some of the base depot workshops, the work for which could be outsourced through suitable means. And some of this is still work in progress, but the larger point is that we are looking at outsourcing of those activities which can result in saving in our revenue costs without actually affecting our operations. The second thing is, we also have a number of activities in which armed forces personnel are deployed, and as a result, these people are not available for active duty in the field. In NCC, we have thousands of armed forces personnel who are deployed. We have now looked at using ex-servicemen who can be used as trainers and ANOs and for other purposes in NCC for the first time. In fact, we are in process of formulating a scheme in which about 3,000 to 4,000 armed forces officers can be sent back to the armed forces, and ex-servicemen can be used in their place. This will result in significant saving of costs for the NCC, because ex-servicemen need to be paid less. But more importantly, this will result in these people who are presently being used for activity which can be done by ex-servicemen as well, to be used in active armed forces duty, and will reduce the pressure or costs of the armed forces. One of the very important measure of reducing revenue expenditure, the biggest reform which was carried out over the last 2 decades was the formation of the CDS. Formation of CDS is important because it signifies government's intent and commitment towards bringing greater jointedness into the system. Now, jointedness is a matter of process, and a lot of things have started to happen. And in the coming years, we will see unfolding many more things in this direction. But what is important is, with this jointedness, we do expect that there will be greater optimal utilization of the forces, duplication will be reduced, and overlaps will be reduced, and we will be able to use this jointedness as a force multiplier in this regard. Another aspect which I would like to say is where we are using in a reasonably big way, and I think more can be done, is the use of technology in our operations. This, I think, has been to Today, world over, armed forces are using tremendous using information technology to improve their functioning, to reduce costs, to make their make them more efficient, more timely in their response. We have taken up several initiatives, in fact, broad-based initiatives across several organizations in defense to use greater technologies, both those which have in some ways more public interface, as well as those which are more with respect to their own operations and functioning. One of the things which forces are today looking at is doing supply chain management and inventory management with using technology. This can result in significant saving in costs across the value chain. Today, for example, we are looking at automation of CSD, which will reduce overheads and costs in functioning of this. Automation in MES, automation in BRO, automation in Coast Guard, automation in various other organizations. In fact, one of the important areas where there was not adequate automation or digitization was MoD itself. And today we have unleashed at least 20 different projects or initiatives which will result in more use of technology, and COVID itself has been a big driver in enabling some of these with respect to. So these are some of the things that by which we could create systemic improvements in terms of making our revenue expenditure optimized significantly. Second one, which I mentioned about, is on the pension and the wage bills. On the pension and the wage bills, there are many steps that can be taken, and some of these steps may not have immediate impact, but may have impact over the medium term or the long term. But the most important aspect of it is that world over today, countries are shifting their dependence from manpower to technology. There is focus on unmannedness of platforms. There is focus on greater robotics to be used, and technology is being used to reduce this dependence on manpower. And this is an area where we are also working towards greater use of technology in our processes, which will reduce our dependence on manpower. The second aspect is, like I mentioned earlier, that we do expect that as part of our jointness, there would be certain reduction in manpower that can be availed. If you look at China, in China, they were able to reduce nearly 15-20% of their manpower with the introduction of reforms in that country. One of the proposals which has been talked about and discussed and is being under consideration is possible extension of retirement age of serving personnel, so that especially those who are retiring after lesser years of services at ages of 35, 40, 45, etc., which could result in both saving in the pension bill as well as reducing the pension liabilities. There are several other steps which are being proposed with respect to how some cost savings can be discussed, some of which we may not be there, but the point I want to make is that today we are looking at what are the different ways by which we can actually look at reducing the pension and wage bills, which will result in consequentially lesser pressure on the budget and spare resources for more capital acquisitions. The third point which I mentioned was with respect to changing the existing model of dependence on import and dependence on manufacturing, which is based on transfer of technology. Now, as we move into the new growth era, it is as technology becomes even more important in the modern warfare, it has become absolutely imperative that we have to uh, 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 the model for self-reliance will be technology will be central to the model of self-reliance in defense. And more than ever before, we are today, therefore, it is necessary that we start developing our own technologies. Now, if we have to look at technologies, it's important to see what is that gives us opportunity and hope that we can develop our technologies. We need to leverage our strengths and we need to build on what capabilities we have. One of the big capabilities that we have is, for example, software industry. And today, there is increasing focus from hardware to cyber, increasing focus on artificial intelligence, increasing focus on using electronic and network-centric warfare. Each of this requires tremendous amount of software capabilities. It is heartening to know that our software industry, which is of course doing a lot of work on the civil side, is also doing on defense side roughly $1.5 to $2 billion of work every year, but for foreign OEMs. Now, this confirms that we have the capability. The question is, how do we leverage this and make it possible that we use our capability? The second big strength that we have is on startups. Today, I mean, having worked in this area with startups for last at least 8-9 years, very closely, both in the Ministry of IT and thereafter in defense production and defense now, I'm absolutely convinced that Indian startup ecosystem has capability to develop technologies which in a conventional paradigm take much longer time. Our own experience with IDEX has shown that startups have developed technologies in something which would take typically 5-6 years have been developed in 8 to 10 months. Something which would cost 50 to 100 crores has been developed at a cost of 1 to 1.5 crores. These numbers seem hugely unbelievable in some way. The amount of saving that it is creating is quite significant. But the biggest advantage of startup is the scale at which, the number of startups that have come up in this area allows us to take up new technology development at multiple fronts simultaneously. And this is something, this strength that we need to leverage upon. Third is, I think, our existing organizations like DRDO and defense PSUs who have huge infrastructure, wealth of experience. How DRDO, of course, is doing a lot of work, and a lot of good work is also done in DRDO. Along with that, DPSUs are now started doing some work on technology development for the last couple of years. Each one of them is working on some areas of interest to them. We can, we can synergize their actions with the overall capability sets. And as well as we need to work along with our industry. That's another area where potentially on technology development, I think we can unleash another set of forces which were today not available. Under Make 2, my own experience again had shown that in about 1.5 years, we had 44 new proposals which the industry had designed and developed and had come forward. Initially, some of these proposals were relatively of platforms or equipment that was smaller in size. But towards the end, the industry had got the confidence to even build bigger platforms in this. Again, the whole idea is that these are resources that are available in the country, and there is absolutely no reason why we should not be able to leverage them. And lastly, I would like to say that there is need for greater involvement of academia to build technology in this regard. On this front, I would also like to mention that there have been several steps which the government has already taken. Just to mention, DRDO has made available today, DRDO technologies are available for industry to use and manufacture at zero cost. DRDO has made its pool of patents available for anyone who's working in that area, again it's for free, for zero cost. DPSUs have set up, in the form of IDEX, they have been funding startups, and are today, startups are showing great amount of promise for developing new technologies. Several, 40 or odd such technologies are under development as we speak. Government has enabled use of private testing, government testing infrastructure for use by private industry, and so on and so forth. This does not mean that all there are several new things that still need to be done. We need to continuously evolve and understand how the situation is panning out, and take steps to further continuously calibrate to be able to make sure that our strengths in this regard are totally can be best developed. But the main point I like to say is that it has now become imperative for us that we move from a manufacturing based model for defense to a technology based model where we use all the resources that we have for doing this. While we have been talking about the three ways by which we could address some of the resource crunch that we face today in defense, a related point which I would like to mention is with respect to aspect of how could additional resources be mobilized for making defense, meeting the defense requirements. And for the first time today, government has asked the Finance Commission to go into this aspect to understand and study how the security needs of defense and home need to be met from the overall budgetary resources. Finance Commission is going through this. I am also a member along with the Home Secretary in that committee, along with the Expenditure Secretary, and we hope that the Finance Commission will come out with some model by which some additional resources will become available. Apart from this, there are other steps that can be used for creating supplementary resources which will reduce the pressure on our budgetary requirements. One of the things, for example, that we have been doing is, which is required, is creating merit accommodation for our armed forces. Now, due to various budgetary constraints, still a large number of houses remain to be built. And given the shortage, sometimes adequate funding has not been possible for this purpose. Over the last decade or so, several models of land monetization have evolved, and NBCC has been one of the pioneers who have come up with such models where, using land monetization, they are able to build residential houses for government and at the same time not put additional budgetary resources. One of the examples of such is in Delhi, where several of the old government colonies are being redeveloped based on this model of resource monetization, if I may say so. And we are actively looking at now whether some of the accommodation requirements of armed forces, which was traditionally being met from the budget, can be met through this model of monetization of land resources and thereby reducing the pressure on the budget. We have been in discussion with NBCC and we hope to work in this regard. The other method for additional resource mobilization that we are looking at is how could various assets which are not required by defense could be meaningfully utilized from time to time. Defense has been giving land, for example, to state governments for various public purposes. And this land sometimes comes, in lieu of that, we get additional land or some other resource which is not very useful. Is it possible to find ways by which some of the assets, and land is just one of the assets, are there ways by which assets which are not required or which have an economic opportunity for monetization, which defense does not need, can be so leveraged to create that space? And we are looking at various opportunities in this regard. Another way by which we are looking at reducing the pressure on the budgetary constraints is leasing of non-mission critical equipment, support equipment like transport aircraft or transport vehicles. For the first time in the DPP, we have introduced a chapter which would enable leasing of certain kind of equipment, etc., for the purposes of defense. Before ending, I would also like to say that one of the important aspect of modern economy where we do wish to look going forward, in fact, two areas where I think the direction of modernization is going to change. One, of course, I have already mentioned in earlier, is the focus shifting from hardware to cyber. And this is something which is continuously happening. We see it happening all the time. And we will need to, this will require, different kind of resource management, and we would be working towards making that shift. The second broad area where we do look to be working as how to augment the security for expanding our blue economy. We have huge potential of developing our marine resources, and government is cognizant of that. A new department for fisheries, as you know, has been created, and that is especially for marine life. But apart from that, there are minerals, there is energy resources that are available, all of which the opportunity exists for us to tap. As we, go towards this area, there are, for example, China today has been the global leader in terms of deep water fishing, and it has been going around fishing across the globe, across the seas in the world, whereas we are still not even looking at going beyond our own territorial waters when it comes to ship. Our fishermen are not trained, they don't have the craft, they don't have the equipment, and we don't have the overall security umbrella for our fishermen to be going deeper in water and tapping the marine resources, even in our own economic zone. So, as we look to develop the blue economy, I think we will need to make sure, as focus does, that the security needs of this new economic area, whether it is petrochemicals, whether it is minerals, whether it is energy, whether it is marine life, as these grow, we need to have the necessary security infrastructure in place to be able to do this. Integral to this is our islands, the 1382 islands that we have across as Indian islands, to be able to use them strategically given their locations in the Indian Ocean, so that we are able to make sure that our strategic interests in this blue economy are protected. I think let me stop here. this is a very, very, high-level overview as how I look at the problem of dealing with resource constraint and the requirement of modernization of defense in the coming years. Thank you very much once again, and I look forward to taking questions, which
Thank you very much, Dr. Ajay Kumar, for that very, very enlightening talk. You actually covered a very broad canvas from outsourcing to the use of IT and technology, reduction of manpower wherever possible, COVID-19 as a driver in defense modernization. That is to say, we convert a challenge into an opportunity. You covered pension and wage bills, extension of retirement age, startups, monetization of land, and so on and so forth. Now, all this has actually stimulated a great deal of interest in terms of the questions that I see here in the chat box. In fact, we will have to institute a prize for anyone who can quickly summarize the cascading flood of questions that are coming your way. But let me make a valiant attempt to do justice to what our well-informed colleagues have come up with. And I will now reel off a few and then have a second go at it as well. So Dr. R.K. Tyagi, he asks whether there is any chance of increase in capex for MoD this year and the next in view of pending priority acquisitions. Also, what are your plans currently on the anvil to actually reduce manpower? Rahul Bedi says that we assume that many of the technologies that you are referring to in terms of induction have been around for a long time. And but for COVID, he hints that this may not have been done. So what really stopped MoD from doing this without the pressure or the stimulus provided by COVID and all the challenges that it brought in its wake? JBS Yadav, he speaks about reducing civilian manpower in defense PSUs and also in the army, and also wants to know why the Department of Defense Production, your previous charge, is not a separate ministry entirely with a different minister as part of the cabinet. Commodore Abhay Kumar Singh from our institute wants to know what would be the intellectual architecture as you envisage it for providing strategic guidance for defense policy. And also he believes that projection of future budgetary requirements in the annual budget from the fiscal management perspective would be helpful. Mr. Ahuja says the US declared defense as critical infrastructure and allocated even greater funds in the wake of the COVID crisis, and that we seem to have done the opposite. In other words, kind of brought about some cuts and pressures. So he also wants to know if the defense industrial corridors will be successful in actually absorbing some of the FDI that may be available coursing through the global system as a result of the decoupling that many are attempting with China. Will the defense corridors play a role in this? And will that expedite defense modernization in any way? That's an interesting question. Mr. Garg remarks that there has been, government has put out advisory that no global tender for government procurement up to 200 crores. That is in light of COVID, etc., and the new policies that have been announced. Will India actually start to develop and design and manufacture this whole spectrum of technological security and defense, electronics, sensors, etc., under this plan? Ambassador Suresh Goyal believes that modernization and greater induction of technology, manpower pruning may not necessarily result in reduction of expenditure, but to the contrary, it may also lead to greater expenditure. I mean, after all, technology doesn't come cheap. And over time, if you are trying to keep up with the rest of the world, you may have to go in for nothing short of the best. Major General Sandhu, he says, wants to know if there are any plans for lateral induction of retiring personnel from the armed forces into the CPOs and other government departments. I will stop in the first round at this and then continue my gallant attempt to decipher the rest that has since then come through in the chat box. The floor is yours, Dr. Ajay Kumar.
Yeah, so I must admit I couldn't take note of all of what you said, but let me please, ask again. I will miss out on some of the points which you made. I just could not take note of all of the points. But let me make two things, specific points. One is, I think on specific projects or contracts, it may not be proper for me to make a comment, here, because each of them have its own implications. But it is very important, and I think that point was made somewhere, that we need to speed up the process of procurement and reform the process of procurement significantly to align with the new approach which we have said. Right now we are in process of rewriting the DPP, and DPP is in the public domain, and we have received extensive comments from all the people. We have a very interactive system by which we want to talk to the stakeholders and get their inputs and finalize the input. But crucially, 2-3 things are what we are looking in the changed DPP. One is, it should be speedier. It should demonopolize existing monopolies, like reducing testing and trial systems, making it streamlining the trial system, which often sometimes take a lot of time. Third is, creating more opportunity for being able to acquire new technologies and domains, particularly indigenous technologies, and whether it is from startups, whether it is from industry, or whether it is from DRDO or the PSUs. As regards defense corridors and FDI, the 2 defense corridors are, perfectly, in fact, both the state governments are inviting FDI with open arms. And it is for, and once this FDI proposal, which is there, which has been announced by the Honorable Finance Minister, is formally approved, it will open new vistas for people who are looking. In fact, I can share without naming that there have been countries who have had discussion with me subsequent to this announcement, inquiring about the details of which will be known once the formal announcement is made. But there is interest, and I think these 2 corridors are definitely areas where this can be done. One of the points I think where people have been asking is whether the new technology. I totally agree with the point that new technology is not. I did not mean by any. Maybe if I have communicated that was not the intent. That new technology will come cheap. New technology is going to increase the assessment, but the fact remains. These are 2 independent points, that focus is shifting from manpower to technology, from being manpower intensive to technology intensive. And second is, technology is going to be costly. So if we can rationalize this transition from manpower intensive to technology intensive, will lead to certain saving of resources on the manpower side, which may or may not be adequate to meet the technology requirements. But we have to mobilize enough resources so that the new technologies, whatever it costs, can be generated. The second part is, which I am not sure if I made it very clear, by indigenous folk, I did say that, quite clearly, that technology has to be, we have to start becoming technology, self-dependent on technology, self-reliant on technology. But more than self-reliant, today, when we are doing TOT, it is open secret that when you do TOT, the cost of production of the same platform is anything between 30% to 60-70% higher than what it is at imported rates. And imported rates themselves are much higher than what the platform costs. Example, there are, a obscene number of examples that can be given, but I mentioned to you in the case of startup, I would like to share with you a specific example. We have this startup which has developed now a 100 megapixel camera, something which we import today for seeing from drones or aeroplanes or from satellites. The cost is roughly about 20 crores. This has been developed in about 10 to 12 months by this startup which works from IIT Delhi, along with has support from IIT Delhi. The cost of each of this camera is going to be about 1 to 1.5 crores. Now, that is the differential in technology products. When you have your own product, the cost can come down significantly. Yet, it is a fact that new technology comes with a cost, and we should be able to find that resources. But the more important point is, these are two independent points. Movement from manpower intensive, technology intensive is a requirement of modern warfare, and is a standalone point. How do we find the resources is our requirement. I am not the lateral induction as CVOs, or for that, there is another point which has been made, is lateral induction of armed forces people in other civilian cadres. I don't know if CVOs is possibly not the only one, but I don't know if that is what the question was. This is something which is,
Yeah, question was about plans for inducting them into retiring people or retired people, just retired people, into CPOs and other government departments.
And other also, right. So, now we are looking into this issue. We have some reservation today at the lower level. And large number of 20% for Group C and 10% for Group D, or the other way around, I forget the number. But there is reservation by which these people can actually, there's reservation in various category of jobs which can be done. At a higher level, at Group B and Group A level, we will have to work. We are today looking how we can work and see if the recruitment rules of those cadres will have to be suitably looked into. There will be issues of seniority and promotions and reporting, etc. So we are looking at it, but this is something which we are examining in consultation with all the stakeholders. I am sorry, the first few ones I have missed out. There's a question on US defense having declared defense as a critical infrastructure. I don't think, first of all, I don't agree that we are reducing our defense expenditure. And defense is a very, we have received all the support that we have received. I would like to share with you that our shipyards and our HAL and our Bell and other major units were all functioning. Private units like Tata Boeing was functioning. However, we had a strategy to deal with COVID at point of time, and we were doing this in alignment with our strategy. It has nothing to do with defense. In fact, defense got a special preference. We got much more preference than that. And we were working along with the national strategy for dealing with defense. So I think this is, and we are proud of our strategy. We today see that we had such last 60 days, our progress, but I don't want to get into that discussion here. But the point I wanted to make was, our defense has been given due importance and special consideration despite the COVID constraints that existed, and we have been able to function as part of this. I missed out the first few questions because I didn't realize so many questions would come. So if you would like to...
Don't worry, I can repeat it for you briefly. What Dr. R.K. Tyagi was asking was about CapEx. CapEx for MoD this year and the next couple of years in view of pending priority acquisitions. And Rahul Bedi was actually referring to whether COVID has goaded and galvanized the MoD into the use of technology. Would it have been done otherwise? I mean, that sort of inference is there.
Yeah, so first question, I think it's a little speculative to say anything what will happen because of COVID, because we have nothing has changed as on date. As regarding, COVID having galvanized MoD, I'm not too sure if that is the right way to put it. Most of the things, and Mr. Tyagi knows it as much as anyone else, a lot of initiatives that whether it is with startups, whether it is with industry, whether it is demonopolizing, and whether it is giving direction to our defense PSUs towards more technology, more focus on IP development. This has been going on for the last few years. So but I must say that what COVID has done was, for the first time, because there was no import and everyone was looking for solutions within the country, then all the forces, again, startups, industry, DPSUs, for example, they all came up with solutions and there was willingness to accept the solution. And as a result, we saw large number, whether it is testing procedures, whether it is ventilators, whether it is all kind of things came up from the industry, and which proves the point which I wanted to make in defense. The important lesson for us is that yes, the capability exists, and as and when there is greater willingness to accept this technology, we'll see the way. Any other points? Because I don't remember the other points.
Don't worry. So now I think you broadly covered some of these. I think there was one interesting question. Let me take this opportunity to flood you with a few more, and also going back to a couple that were probably left unaddressed. So that question from Commodore Abhay Singh was really about whether or not you plan to have some kind of intellectual architecture, that's what he calls it, for providing strategic guidance for defense policy. And so that was a two-part question. Second part of his question was projection of future budgetary requirements in the annual budgets for better fiscal management. While I'm on the subject, may I just use this time to give you a couple of more questions. Now, Professor Bharat Karnad wants to know if there's a mechanism for inter-se prioritization of defense expenditure programs. I'm glad it's so succinctly worded that it's easier for me to read out. I'm not going to go into the rather lengthy observations that have been addressed in the chat box to everyone, so everyone knows what those are. But I do see a couple of pithy questions there as well. And so there is one more, for instance, trying to get there. Bear with me, please. I might just lose it. But yes, the floor is yours. Let me hand over the floor at this stage, and I will continue with my endeavors. Thank you.
So I think on this, I would like to have, a more detailed, separate discussion with Professor Abhay Singh, because this is something on strategic intellectual architecture we have been discussing internally for a few months. I think there is need for much more greater strategic thought going on into some of our defense policy requirements and defense strategic requirements. And I would be very keen to understand because for me this is more of a process of connecting the various resources that we have. Like in the industry, we said we will leverage the resources that we have in the industry. Similarly, on the intellectual side, we have so many people who have great knowledge and understanding of this whole ecosystem, and so where I see my role is to be able to connect with these resources and to be able to leverage on their expertise and their resources. So I would be very keen to discuss separately offline on how what this is about and how we could. But yes, the answer is we do look forward to having greater strategic thinking process and architecture by which a greater strategic thinking goes on into our defense strategic development. On the issue of inter-se prioritization, of course, I can give you, I'm sure Professor Bharat is aware of it. We have a process of inter-se prioritization based on which the DAC, then finally there is an annual plan which is drawn up, there is a long-term plan which is drawn up, and based on which the DAC takes a decision. So yes, there is a process.
Thank you for covering that. We have a question from Raghavan, and I can't tell which Raghavan it is, but it could be Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, it could be Ambassador T.C. Raghavan, or it could be another Raghavan entirely. But anyway, the question here is, could you please ask how DPP 2020 will be tweaked to incorporate indigenization in the evaluation process in addition to L1? And secondly, the definition of indigenization, that is to say, prioritizing technology over volume or value. I then have another question concerning OFB corporatization. How do you see it panning? Because the finance minister has also referred to it recently as part of Vocal for Local. Then there is a couple of more, but I'll come to that. The floor is yours, please.
Right. Yeah. So on that, in the DPP, we have two things. We have provision by which we give a certain amount of additional credit for additional indigenization, and I forget the numbers. But there is a provision for qualitative improvement based on higher indigenization. Incidentally, while this is being incorporated in DPP 2020, even this year, in the last few months, in a few contracts which were based on indigenous technology manufacturers, we have already started introducing that provision where we give higher value for higher indigenous content. As regards valuation of indigenous technology content, I would like to share, honestly, this is something which I have been dealing with, as the author of the first policy for preference to domestic manufacturers in 2011, 2012, where this issue was, how do you determine what is domestic manufacturing and how much of value addition? I have been, I have had detailed discussions with lot of, not discussions, have implemented this actually over the years and also faced the difficulties of, assessing indigenous content. It's a extremely complex questions. We have also had discussions with various global organizations who possibly to understand their experience for doing it. And why I'm saying this, there is no good method. After all these years, last 10 years of work in this area, I can tell you this is personal Ajay Kumar's view, this is not Defense Minister's view. I have not come across any good method which could address this problem objectively and in a complete manner. Nevertheless, DPP has proposed certain value addition norms which are significantly more than what it exists in the current DPP. And again, like I said, I would rather be happy to hear from, there is also inclusion of technology for the first time in it, and it is not merely about manufacturing or assembly. But nevertheless, like I said, even the present formulation, if you ask me, is not complete in itself, and if there are any suggestions for improvement, we are open to getting those suggestions. On the corporatization of OFB, I think this is this announcement has been made by Honorable Finance Minister. I think this is something which is very important decision. It's been several committees over the last 2 decades have made this recommendation. It is good for the future of OFB because today OFB works as a government attached office, as a government department. As a result, there is no focus on developing a balance sheet, profit and loss, cost consciousness. In government department, we don't have a cost consciousness because there's no balance sheet. We have a budget and you spend that budget. And in case of OFB, it is a cost plus model which is used currently to value its products. People in OFB have tremendous amount of potential, but the system today that under it functions does not allow that potential to actually get developed. And therefore, corporatization of OFB will enable that potential to get unleashed and actually identifying their strengths and weaknesses, which they can then address. Because of this corporatization, as and when it happens, I personally feel we will see greater focus on today, for example, OFB has, I can share with you, we get large number of inquiries on for export of products produced by OFB. Now, since the whole OFB model is based on government budget, there is no budget is provided for what the requirements of Indian needs are. So if OFB has to export something, there is today no budget head, and all of us who have worked in the government know how difficult it is to get some money in the government system for which it has not been provided in the budgetary system. It becomes extremely complicated for a simple thing like export to happen. So whether it is export, whether it is technology development and technology acquisition, today OFB cannot do mergers and acquisitions because it is not a corporate entity. Whether it is in terms of overall proficiency or productivity, all of this I see there will be tremendous improvement in OFB's performance, and which will be good in the term interest of the OFB.
I'm afraid we will not let you off so soon. If you can bear with us for a few more questions. One that was left out was the question about reducing civilian manpower in the DPSUs and in the armed forces also. Thereafter, if I may pose to you a few more, what are the chances of setting up a defense procurement organization? Next, there is a feeling that COVID-19 may actually be developing into a barrier to work in the defense sector. Next, from the macro to the micro, there is a suggestion that refurbishment and upgradation of current vehicle assets in the armed forces can be given over to DPSUs, I suppose, as a cost-saving measure, extending their lifespans. Thereafter, there is a very interesting question. When we talk of reducing manpower in the armed forces, will there be political support for massive reductions, which may actually result also in massive unemployment? As you know, that the armed forces are a kind of career employment of choice for many, many parts of India. Geographically also, there are constituencies where you have an overwhelming number of people from, say, Haryana or from the Kumaon and Garhwal Hills and many other parts, Punjab, etc., just to name a few. So what happens there? Is there political support? Will this become some kind of a hot potato there? And one more, which is a question relating to shortening critical defense acquisition cycles. That last one came from Ambassador Yogendra Kumar. I'm not mentioning everyone's names because that will take up time. You will bear with me, please. Yes, please.
On reduction of civilian manpower, I think we have already started the process of reduction. Recently, 9,000 plus posts were abolished in the MES. These were all civilian posts. We are working on a process of, examining what other non-essential civilian posts can be abolished. So there is no bar that, in fact, the Shikatkar committee has given very clear recommendations of where the optimization, and Shikatkar committee I refer to because they were a set of experts, who possibly, who went on into this in great detail and gave the recommendations. So we are guided by some of their recommendations that are trying to work on this, and we are looking at reducing civilians. There is no bar on reducing civilians. Defense procurement organization, there is no current proposal that is there, but we, as you know, one of the things that have been said is that we are looking at whether we can get some professional input into the defense acquisition process in form of a project management unit, and we are looking at what the modalities of that could be, and I think those will unfold, or those will evolve based on greater discussion. COVID putting restrictions on work, I suppose yes. I think we'll all have to live with it. If I've understood the question correctly, I really. But we'll have to also, we were having a discussion, and shipyards have created, shifts, and they have created a number of people who can work in the given workspace at a point of time. Those numbers have been reduced, but based on that and with prolonged hours, they have been able to, have thousands of people working. So new models of working will have to evolve at least for the current year till the COVID situation prevails, and we will have to work. I am not sure if I understand the question on refurbishment of existing platforms or DPSUs. Today, best of my understanding, I mean, a lot of platforms are being refurbished. For example, HAL maintains a lot of lot of existing platforms of Indian Air Force, and they keep getting refurbished from time to time. Similarly, OFB maintains some of the platforms, tanks, BMPs, etc., for the Indian Army. I am not very sure if I understand this question totally, and I'm happy to answer it once it is there. So today we have not taken any decision to reduce manpower in the armed forces. So the question of political support in this regard, the point I'm making is the question of need for moving from manpower intensive to technology intensive. That does not necessarily mean that we are talking of reduction of manpower. When we had IT come, there was a feeling that IT will lead, computers will lead to manpower loss, employment. See, the shifting of manpower requirement does not necessarily lead to less employment. We'll have to analyze this in greater detail to be able to say whether it will be lesser manpower or higher manpower, to be able to make a comment on that. The point which was made was regarding shortening critical defense acquisition. And you'll have to explain this to me. I don't understand this fully well, actually. It's defense, last question, shortening defense acquisition circle.
Yeah, well, that's what it says. So is there any plan to basically bring down the timelines?
We should. I think I totally agree with
perception that it's long drawn.
Yeah, 100% I agree with this suggestion, and I think DPP 2020 we are making some suggestions for reducing timelines, whether it is, for example, timelines in formulation of QRs, timelines for testing and trials, timelines. So wherever else, and we are happy to receive any of the suggestions of how these timelines can be reduced. So yes, this is on this area. I think there is no. We are all trying our best to see how the timelines can be reduced.
There are some related questions. One is about national consensus on strategic perceptions, as in threat perceptions. And since most acquisitions are ultimately linked to what we perceive to be our threats, and if there is no consensus, then how do we bridge that gap? In other words, who does that job? Is it episodic? Is it systemic? Is there generally a broad consensus? Governments come and go sometimes. Are there different perceptions? And so do acquisitions get linked to, say, these, sui generis perceptions in regard to threats and strategic issues? Secondly, what kind of difficulties do you envisage in using artificial intelligence in the defense sector, given that there are some legal and ethical implications also involved, as in safeguards? Thirdly, you spoke about you spoke about deep sea fishing, etc., receiving a fillip. And so does that necessarily mean greater allocation for the Navy? And lastly, what are the specific steps that you are taking as government to ramp up our defense exports? I am through with the questions, so really that's the last cluster.
This is the last one, right?
Indeed. I'm acutely aware of our impinging on your time.
Yeah, I think I also need to go for another meeting at 12:30, so I need to go back and prepare. So,
thank you.
So, on national consensus, I think there is a lot of consensus on the broad policy objectives, broad national policy objectives. But on specific individual acquisition processes, I think we should not look for consensus. It is the responsibility of the government and the government officials to make sure that the processes that are laid down, the accountability, that mechanism that has been laid down is complied with, and they are responsible for doing what they do. So I don't think, whereas larger national consensus may be, may not look at all the exigencies of, CVC or CAG, etc. So at a broad policy level, at the broad national requirement level, I think there is policy consensus, and I think there is a significant amount of it already. On issue of AI, I think this is it's a great question. I mean, there are a lot of things that can be said. Let me say I'm this is an area of tremendous interest to me. So one could have a session on
listeners
AI.
should know. Listeners should also know that you are not just an IIT graduate, but that you've also dealt for many years with information technology and AI.
Technology, right. And we had also set up, one of the first things after coming in defense production we had done was to set up a defense AI task force under the chairmanship of present Chairman Tata Sons, who was formerly CEO of TCS, and it was the Industry Forces Ministry Task Force, which has made specific recommendations with respect to induction of AI. And there are a lot of some ethical issues also involved. But I think apart from the ethical issues, which we can discuss at length, but more importantly, two things are clear. One is we cannot escape using AI, and AI is coming in all walks of life. As is commonly said, AI is wherever we see computer today or wherever we see processor, it is going to be as ubiquitous as processor today is in our electronics, So which means that you can't have anything. Every single aspect of a functioning will have some AI or the other in future as we go along. So whether it is inventory management, whether it is personal management, whether it is, and including defense platforms will have AI. So this is going to happen, this is happening, and we have no escape. Second thing is, AI requires a model of the biggest challenge which I see in our being able to take, China and US have taken tremendous amount of leadership in AI globally, and other countries are also taking a lot of leaps and strides. We have a strong software industry. Several of them are working in AI field, but the connect between government and industry needs to be further improved. And I think the present model of contracting does not suit well for AI, because AI is enriched by data where it requires tremendous amount of trust-based system. So we need to move from basically, because the competence exists largely in the industry rather than within the government. We will have to develop more capability. We'll have to develop models of partnership with industry rather than contracting model where I give you a contract and you deliver as per the contract and then say goodbye to each other. So that model will possibly not work, and that is...
So that's more like the Israeli model that you're suggesting, more like the Israeli model, where it's a continuous process.
Right. Deep sea, yeah. So, I don't want to... Again,
on deep sea, if I may just clarify, Dr. Ajay Kumar, it's not just deep sea fishing, but obviously the deep seabed mining of resources like polymetallic nodules and the rare earths and the kind of stuff that the Chinese are preparing for in the Central Indian Ocean and near the Rodrigues Ridge. And so, does this kind of a thing not need naval support, and therefore do we envisage greater outlay for the Navy as well?
So the point I would like to say is yes. Answer to your first part of the question is yes. The fact that you see today, it's not only about deep sea resources, not only about fishing, it's not only about marine resources, it's also about strategic content. The way today the whole of Indian Ocean after South China Sea is becoming a important theater of activity. I think this is there is very great importance. The question of, I think we need to move from Navy, Air Force, Army kind of visualization of things. And that's the whole idea of creating this great reform of CDS. We are looking at national needs today under the aegis of CDS, and under what the national needs pan out to be, those will need to be catered to. So maybe it will be some naval resources will have to be there, or maybe it will require some other strategic, air, capabilities to be created to deal with, Indian Oceans. I leave it to the professionals to decide that. But the fact is that Indian Ocean region will have to be an important area, which will have to be, security of that will have to be addressed.
Yes, that very last question about ramping up defense exports, please. Yes.
Yeah. On defense export, I think we have had taken large number of steps, and there has been significant amount of progress. For the first time, we started, opening up the whole process of defense exports and making defense industry participate in a big way a few years back. And just to, I'm saying these numbers with memory. In 2016-17 or 15-16, the defense exports were only 1,500. And in 2018-19, they had risen to nearly 11,000 crores. So there was 8x growth in the defense exports. 80% of this growth came from the private sector. So bringing in private sector to be able to export aggressively. Now, one was we streamlined the process of, while we are part of the, various international agreements like Wassenaar Agreement, MTCR, Australian Group, and we respect the obligations, we found that there are ways by, if we streamline our own internal processes and enable our private sector to reach out to other countries, as other countries do when they export to India, then a lot more can be achieved. So we had an online portal, some clearances for export which used to take several months, in fact sometimes over years, but now typically get resolved in 1 week, 2 weeks time. In fact, timelines for repeat orders is in days, 2 or 3 days or something, I forget. So much faster clearances for anyone who wants to export can be done online today. Second thing is we created a mechanism by which we share information with potential exporters. We have an export directory online again, through which when a lead comes, interest comes, to those people who are involved in that particular making of that particular item, we share that information with them so that those people can also go and start exporting to these people. We have spoken to other countries. We have set up nodal officers to facilitate. So US was one of the first ones who came forward to enable export of items from India. Russia has done it, France has done it, and some other countries have done it. Now, when I say these numbers, I must also mention these are only those items which require comet clearance. So these are actually items which are, in some hard way classified as defense. Otherwise, there are a lot of items which are defense items but don't classify under comet, so anyway get exported without seeking SCOMET clearances. So these numbers of 1,500 crores to 11,000 crores. We also encouraged our defense PSUs to start exporting. In fact, for the first time, defense PSUs have started opening offices across various countries which are potential markets. BL has opened 2-3 offices. BEML has appointed several dealers across the country for their products, and so on and so forth. Earlier, the DPSUs had offices, but they were all for acquisition. This is the first time we are opening these offices. Each of these DPSUs were given certain targets. And for the first time, these export targets were put part of their MOU with the Secretary Defense Production. So today, the assessment of the DPSU among various other parameters of its functioning like profitability, timely completion, etc., export is an important parameter. In OFB, we have made one member for export responsible, and new items of export. For example, we found that OFB had a lot of interest was there for OFB for ammunition, for small arms, for explosives, etc. Of course, OFB had challenges in being able to service those requests as compared to PSUs, but there was a lot of interest in OFB for exporting some of the products that OFB could produce. So we have tried to enable all the constituent members. We have still not had the same, most of these export relates to parts and components. We have not had similar success in platforms because the model by which we develop our platforms, all our platforms are dependent on some components, some crucial technologies which are imported, and the restriction imposed by the exporting nation on us, so that even when we are exporting the platform, the exporting nation gives clearances, and the amount of restrictions they put tremendously reduces our ability to be able to export. So it is same, brings us back to the same exports. We have to have tech platforms which are totally created.
Well, friends, yes, go ahead, please. Go ahead, please. Sorry.
No, I'm done actually. Thank you. Yeah. So exports, I think it's one of the relatively has been growing at a fast pace. One of the things which has made, along with startups and industrial participation, has been one area where there has seen significant improvement.
And it actually coincided with your term as Secretary, Department of Defense Production. For the most part, this quantum jump from 1,500 crores to 11,000 crores. So our warmest congratulations to you for that as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Look, friends, I am acutely aware of the kind of time that we have taken of the Defense Secretary. And on behalf of all of us, I actually want to thank him for the generosity with which he spent time with us and the remarkably candid manner in which he has covered a very broad canvas of issues. He has shone light on a number of very critical areas in the defense sector where we are seeking to modernize, where we are seeking self-reliance. And as you grapple with all these issues, we can only wish more power to your elbow so that you can carry out your onerous duties even more efficiently and even more with greater efficacy. You are known for efficiency and efficacy, and under your leadership, I'm sure the Department of Defense and the Ministry of Defense will have very many more achievements. With these few words, I also want to thank all our participants today for joining us. And once again, a very big thank you to Dr. Ajay Kumar for spending so much time with us. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you very
much. Wish
much.
you all
Thank
very
you
good
once
health.
again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.